Hey, Nation, it's the Three Musketeers reunited. It's been some time since we've all been on. There's Michael Jenkins. Hello. There's Ken Dwight. Hello. And myself, Harry Brailsford. We have an interesting conversation this month. As in North America, we call it, we're into the dog days of summer. Michael, you're in your winter down in Adelaide, Australia. So, and all that. But we were talking about the nature of some attacks that are occurring that are politically motivated, state actors, and so on. Who'd like to start? Ken, do you want to lead us off on what the framework of these kind of attacks are, and then we'll go forward.
Okay, well, just kind of a very brief history lesson here. Back in the early days when viruses first started appearing, they were mainly used for vandalism, just to cause trouble. They delete files, format the hard drive, or things like that. Of course, in recent years, it's been all about the money. And in the last, well, since 2013 mostly, ransomware, of course, has been one of the big sources of money. But then a couple of years ago, there was a large attack that was initially reported as being ransomware. Then it turned out there was no ransom demand, or there was, but it didn't go anywhere. And that ended up being a one country that actually was trying to electronically attack another country they had a former relationship with. And so the whole objective was to wipe everything. There was no recovery from it. And so that's another form of malware that has shown up again recently. And Michael and I were talking about the fact that he saw one in Australia not long ago that was similar in its effect. Although I don't believe it was represented as being ransomware, was it, Michael? It just looked like, okay. So yeah, it is a thing. And so I thought it was worth mentioning and letting people know that it's out there. It shouldn't affect us or our clients, but you never know.
Yeah, Michael?
Let's just go through that. Actually, the incident we've been discussing, Ken, there's actually been a few more. So it's not a one-off. It's not something random. It is happening. And here in Australia, our Prime Minister has gone to the extent of actually going to the media, appearing on Facebook and everywhere else, trying to let all the small businesses know you need to get all your files up to date, your antivirus up to date, because as a country, we're under attack. And that's probably happening to other countries as well, as countries try and get data from other countries. Now, just to lay out the scenario for you, the one that's of main concern is a particular business where you're quite right, there was no ransom note left. And the intention of the attack was to completely render the data useless. It was to make sure that the backups were useless, that there was nothing in the logs, nothing to point back to anywhere in any location, and take this business down. Take them completely offline. Now, this particular business, they dealt with the migration of people. So they're dealing with sensitive data like passports, birth certificates, things like that. And the file structure and file names and file dates were all left intact. But instead of encrypting the files, they were just completely overwritten with null characters, which means there's no unencryption. There's no note left behind. So there's nothing to say, pay me money, I'll give it back to you. And the backups were also overwritten with null characters. Now I could see that by opening up a hex editor and having a look in the file. It was a PDF, say, of 8 meg, just completely empty. And it targeted particular files. Now, what we had realized is that this actor had gotten into this machine a little earlier, spent the time to work out what type of data there was. So they had actually been on the system watching for possibly weeks, I don't know, come in through remote desktop and then targeted what they wanted and wiped it out. Now, this business has nothing to recover from. There's nothing to unencrypt. There's nothing to put aside and hope in the future there's a decryptor. There's just nothing. And unfortunately, in their situation, they have to start from scratch. And with the kind of work that they do, that's now left a whole bunch of people in limbo. They don't really belong here. They don't really not belong here. Their paperwork no longer exists. And some of the documents are a one-off. They're birth certificates that cannot be recreated. They're not here in this country. They're in a different country. So this is the wipeware. This is the overwriting, the removal of access to the data. It's basically denial of service to your files. Now, what was curious is this particular company's business is to deal with a particular other country and migrating people between the two. So it's fairly obvious it was a state-based actor. We thought this was a one-off, and we collected all the data. We reviewed it. We tried to find out anything about it. The logs are empty. The Active Directory on the server that housed this client was then nuked. As soon as we started digging around, somebody knew we were there, so somebody was watching us, and they actually killed the server. There was no recovery. Now, we've seen this pattern again, a second and a third time, and it's happening for financial institutions. It's happening for people that handle accounting information, medical data of a particular nation. Now, I'm not going to name that nation, and it could be any nation because different countries have different disputes, whether it be trade disputes or whatever it might be with other different countries. The problem is this technology exists. The ability to take a business completely offline by overriding their data, finding their backups, and overriding their backups. And this has increased since COVID-19. I'm not sure whether because we've all gone into lockdown or we're all hoarding particular types of data or people have got time on their hands. But let's face it, COVID-19 has completely changed the way we work, completely changed what we back up and how we deal with things. And this is an evolution.
Yeah. Hey, I'll raise my hand. I'm hanging on by my fingernails to keep up with you guys, but I can make a contribution. Folks, if you go to the SMB Nation YouTube channel, which is in fact where you're basically watching this, and search on Black Hat, I have about a 5-minute piece on screen number 2. I did it 11 months ago when Black Hat, the conference actually occurred at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. And I interviewed a guy named Alexander Klimberg, a security expert and academic, and runs some sort of public policy. And he had a speech called the Cyber Shell Game. And here's what that video is about and why we care today. Is it was about state actors, state-sponsored evil things going on with cybersecurity. And he laid out, how that works. I mean, who's funding it? And you had little, I think, honey bears and soft bears and cozy bears and bad bears and all sorts of things. But really powerful speaker. So I've been exposed. To this conversation, and it's going on all the time between different governmental states, and they're playing for real. So that's my feeble contribution. Hey, Michael, I want to double click down into the work from home components. So maybe we've checked off on, some of the attacks that are politically motivated and so on. So Michael, let's talk work from home and that landscape with security today.
Well, let's be honest, we all rapidly worked from home. We didn't have much choice. We just had to do it. And when people did it, we were running out of things like webcams and even antivirus. So people marched off and started working from home, possibly from personal machines or possibly from a machine that was at work they dragged to home. And none of us really had time at that breakneck speed to think about security. Yes, we were implementing VPN, we were implementing different ways to get in from home, but the overall plan wasn't there. People were just thinking about safety and social distancing and being able to keep operational, but from home. And what that's led to is a different style of attack, because now the weakest link to get into major corporations is sitting at home. It's people unprepared at home who are sharing their computers with their sons and daughters doing homework on the same machine or playing games on the same machine and downloading stuff they shouldn't be downloading. They don't have second logons. They're using the same logon for everything they're doing. The kids are turning off the antivirus because it interferes with their games. And then, of course, you're fighting with the fact that somebody's watching streaming TV in the other room and you're trying to get the bandwidth and all the rest of it. So many complications working from home. Well, the malware and viruses and hackers out there, people know this is a weak link, and this is a great way to get passwords, get information, and of course, breach the data and take complete copies of things they shouldn't have access to. And so this has been an increase, not so much the ransomware at businesses, but more we're seeing people getting into networks from home and actually copying data and then going to the customer and saying, hey, we've got your data. We're not going to ransom it, but did you know you can get a fine because it leaked out? And by the way, you might want to pay us some money to keep this quiet. And that happened to a business here in South Australia where they lost everything. They had everything copied, I should say, up to the cloud, and then they were held to ransom for that cloud information to then be deleted. And it came through a home connection.
Yep.
So we've rapidly done this, and now we've got to rapidly fix this. We've got to start thinking smarter about how we handle data, who we give it to, who's got rights, what passwords we use, and how do we use our home computers? Are we multi-using with our kids? Is it our machine or is it work's machine? So this is a whole new area. It's existed before, but it's just accelerated dramatically, and this is where we're headed.
All right, thank you, Michael. Hey, Ken, with the couple minutes we have left, why don't you add to that with your own experience in the practice you have, but maybe more importantly, the community you've built as the virus doctor.
Well, the big thing, as Michael alludes to, is the fact that with all the work from home, it wasn't thought through, and there wasn't a plan in a lot of cases. And as you know, a home router, software that a home computer is using are nowhere nearly as secure as what they're accustomed to in the work environment. And so gradually more of that is happening, but at the same time, the bad guys have really ramped up their efforts. Depending on whose numbers you listen to, it's anywhere from 2 or 3 to 6 or 8 or 10 times more spam and spear phishing emails with subject lines related to COVID-19. Click here for the latest exposure map, or your risk of getting infected, or whatever. And unfortunately, a lot of people are falling for that. And it's just the number of bad guys and their devotion to their craft hasn't decreased at all. There's no unemployment lines in the malware business.
Yeah.
So
well,
I'm hearing pretty much the same things from my other MSP and break fix clients too, in terms of their end users they're supporting. There's one other thing just to amplify on what Michael mentioned, a relatively recent trend that started about a year ago with ransomware is also exposureware. As Michael indicated, a lot of people that get hacked, get held for ransom, don't report it, and they may be required to. There may be fines or penalties, and certainly bad PR. And so what the bad guys are doing now is, in addition to encrypting the data, they're saying we're going to make it public or sell it on the dark web if you don't pay us X number of dollars of Bitcoin. So they keep coming up with more ways to make money out of their efforts.
Yeah, well, my head's spinning as usual. Hey guys, moving forward, I'll tell you what, I like the Three Musketeers back together, and it kind of changes up the dialogue a little bit. So let's, hey Jenny, if you could make a note, but let's do this over the next several months, where all three of us get on again for the monthly Around the Horn and just kind of shake and bake a little bit. And well, Ken and Michael, keep it safe. Ken, I think you're having some record heat down in your part of the world in Houston, Texas. Michael, again, I think it's probably a little more pleasant weather for you. And we're still struggling a little bit with January. Now, it's not the month of June, but the point is Seattle does have a way of almost having some January-like weather in the summer. I'll end with a phrase I once heard. The coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. We'll make that the final word. Thank you, gents. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you, Harry. Michael, good seeing you.
Thank you. See you later, guys.